The Capture the Desert was quiet after the storm. Ash floated on the wind like black snowflakes, drifting over the charred remains of a once-living village. The smoke rose thin and gray into the pale morning sky. Saguaros stood like silent sentinels, their arms stretched upward in witness to what had just happened. Nalin knelt in the dirt, wrists bound, her long dark hair tangled with soot and blood. She didn't cry. Crying was for after the danger had passed, if it passed at all, around her. Soldiers paced, some laughing, some wiping sweat from their brows. One leaned against a scorched beam that had once held up a cooking shelter. He tossed a stone at her feet, sneering. "Don't look so angry, Apache. You're lucky we didn't just shoot you like the rest." She said nothing. Sergeant Harlan approached, a veteran of too many Indian campaigns. His eyes were cold and sunken. He glanced down at her, holding a folded piece of parchment in his gloved hand. "Her fate. She's the one," he said flatly. "Lieutenant Price swears he saw her helping that outlaw during the ambush near Dry Creek." One of the privates stepped forward. "Sir, she had no weapon on her. She was trying to pull a child out of a burning lodge." Harlan glared. "Doesn't matter? The people in Silverton want blood for the attack last week. 7 settlers dead. This one fits the part." The private looked away, jaw tight. They hauled her onto a wagon bound for Silverton, a dusty, growing town 2 days' ride west. As they rode through broken sage and sand, Nalin sat still, shackled between barrels of supplies. Her shoulders burned where the rope had cut into them during the struggle. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. The village had been her home since she was a girl. She could still hear the voices of her elders, smell the pinyon smoke. See her little brother Taza running barefoot through the scrub. Was he still alive? Had he escaped? No one spoke of him, and she didn't ask. Silverton loomed by sunset on the second day. The town was tense. News of the raid on the settlers' wagon train had spread like fire in a haystack, and the story had grown with each telling. Some said the Apache had tortured their victims. Others said they'd taken a child and vanished into the hills. By the time Nalin arrived, she was already guilty in their eyes. They dragged her into the sheriff's office, where Marshal Cobb stood waiting. He was tall, gray-mustached, and had once been a decent man. But fear had made him bitter. He looked at Nalin like she was a rabid animal. "Trials in 3 days," he told the sergeant. "But I'll tell you, now it won't matter. Folks are out for justice." Harlan nodded. She was seen aiding the fugitive. "That's all they'll need." Cobb glanced at Nalin. "She speaks English. She understands more than she lets on," Harlan replied. "But she hasn't said a word." They threw her in the holding cell, a 10-by-10 space with rusted bars and a dirt floor. That night, men came and stood outside the jail, staring in silence. Some spit in her direction. One threw a rotten apple. She didn't flinch. The next morning, a preacher came. He offered her a Bible. She didn't take it. That afternoon, someone painted the word murderer on the jail's outer wall in red. By the third day, the gallows were being built in the town square. Inside her cell, Nalin crouched in the shadows, listening to the hammering. Her mind replayed the last hours of the raid. The flames, the gunshots, the women screaming. She hadn't fought. She'd tried to shield Taza to get him to the riverbed. She hadn't even seen the white men who were ambushed. But they didn't want facts. They wanted someone to blame. She sat quietly, waiting for the sound of footsteps, those that would take her to the judge. And maybe, soon after, to the rope. She didn't know that, just outside of town, a man named Tom Barrett had just dismounted his horse and heard the townsfolk murmuring about the Apache girl set to hang. And though he didn't know her name, and hadn't seen her face, something stirred inside him, a memory he thought he'd buried in the red soil of Arizona. Something told him he needed to ride into town. The rancher Tom Barrett didn't care much for towns. Too many eyes, too many people talking about things they didn't understand. But when he passed through Silverton, that dusty afternoon, something in the air stopped him cold. He'd come to pick up supplies, horse tack, coffee, maybe a bottle of whiskey, if his conscience would allow it. The town square was unusually crowded. Men leaned on fence rails, murmuring low. Women whispered behind parasols. Kids pointed toward the gallows being raised. Wooden beams cracking into place, like bones being set. Tom tied his mare to the hitching post outside the general store and asked a question he rarely posed to strangers. "What's all this about?" The shopkeeper, a young man with a jittery jaw and ink-stained fingers, looked up. "They're hunging an Apache girl. Caught her after that settler massacre out by Dry Creek." Tom's brow furrowed. She guilty? The shopkeeper shrugged. Does it matter? They say she was helping the outlaw. That's enough for folks around here. Tom didn't answer. He took his flour and coffee and stepped outside, but he didn't walk to his horse. He stood still for a while, staring at the gallows like he'd seen a ghost. The name Dry Creek meant something to him. He remembered it from a war patrol years back, when he rode under Captain Whiting through Apache lands, before he laid down his rifle for a plow. He also remembered the feeling in his gut back then, that not all the people they were fighting were truly the enemy. His late wife, Alina, had taught him that Alina was half Apache, proud, strong, with laughter that filled every empty space in his life. She had died 3 winters ago from pneumonia, buried beneath the mesquite trees on their ranch. Her absence still clung to Tom like dust on boots. Impossible to shake, he left the square and headed toward the jail. Marshal Cobb was sitting behind the desk, cleaning his pistol, when Tom walked in. "Barrett," Cobb said with a nod. "Ain't seen you in town since the 4th of July parade, 2 years ago." "I hear you got a girl locked up," Tom said quietly. "Apache." Cobb raised an eyebrow. "That's right, Nayland's her name. Won't talk. Sentencing's tomorrow." "You certain she's guilty?" Cobb sat back in his chair. "Don't need to be. She was with the wrong people, at the wrong time. There's a mood in this town, Tom. Folks are angry. You know what happened at Dry Creek?" "I know the difference between justice and revenge," Tom said, voice low. The marshal narrowed his eyes. "Careful how you talk." "Can I see her?" Cobb snorted. "You think talking to her's gonna change anything?" Tom didn't answer. After a long pause, Cobb motioned toward the back. 10 minutes. The cell was darker than Tom expected. The light from the single window cast long bars across the dirt floor. Nayland sat in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, watching him with unblinking eyes. He took off his hat and crouched down just outside the bars. "My name's Tom," he said. "Tom Barrett. I used to ride with the army. Now I run cattle, west of here." No response. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to understand." Still, she said nothing. Tom took a slow breath. "My wife Elena, her people were she taught me the old words. The old ways, taught me to see past what others fear." That made her blink. A flicker. "I don't believe you're guilty," he said, "but that doesn't matter unless we can prove it. You got family? Anyone who might speak for you?" Her voice was barely audible. "Taza," Tom leaned in. "Your brother," she nodded. "He ran. When the soldiers came, do you know where he'd go? East, to the mountain, to the place of the spirits." Tom stood slowly. "That's a long ride." She looked up at him then. Really looked. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because no one else is," he said. Then next morning, the town gathered for sentencing. The judge barely read the charges. The jury whispered among themselves. When the gavel fell, it was over. Execution scheduled for 3 days' time. Tom left the courthouse with his jaw clenched. He knew what he had to do. He didn't know yet how far he'd have to go or what it would cost him. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her die. The heat in Silverton settled like a shroud the morning after the sentencing. Dust clung to windowsills, boots, and brows. Townsfolk passed each other in the street with tight smiles, nodding solemnly, like a chore had been completed. Justice, they believed, was in motion. But Tom Barrett felt no peace. He stood on the edge of the square, watching men reinforce the gallows platform. A carpenter adjusted a rope with meticulous care, as if preparing for a wedding ceremony rather than a killing. A few boys ran circles nearby, laughing and pointing. One mimed the noose and stumbled in a mock death. Sending his friends into fits of laughter, Tom turned away, bile in his throat. Back at the sheriff's office, he knocked on the door until Cobb answered with a grunt. "I need to speak with her." Again, Tom said without preamble. Cobb scratched his chin, sighed, and stepped aside. "You'll get the same silence." But Nayland wasn't silent this time. When Tom stepped into the cell block, she was standing. Her posture had changed, not broken anymore, but braced. Like someone expecting a storm. "I saw your eyes," she said quietly, as he approached. "You don't hate me. I don't know you," Tom replied. "But I've seen what hate does. I've seen it burn homes and twist men's minds." She stared through the bars. "They want to hang me for what someone else did. I believe that, then stop them." Tom hesitated. "I'm trying." He told her what little he'd learned. A man named Lieutenant Price had claimed he saw Nayland aiding a known Apache outlaw during the Dry Creek ambush. No other witnesses. No physical evidence, just one man's word, and a town eager to believe it. Nayland said the outlaw had never been in her village. She had been helping a child escape the flames when the soldiers stormed in. That child Tazout escaped. Yes, but she hadn't seen him since Tom left the jail that afternoon with a fire in his chest. He rode out to the ruins of Not village. The smell of smoke still lingered. He found charred beams, broken pots, burned blankets. No body as those had been buried, or taken. But something odd caught his attention, a trail of wagon wheels, faint in the dust. And boot prints military issue, heading north, away from where the soldiers claimed they came in. He followed them a mile before they faded near a dry arroyo. That night he rode to Fort Maddock, the nearest army outpost. He found an old contact there, Corporal Will Dyer, who had served under the same banner years back. They shared a drink in the mess hall. "You were at Dry Creek?" Tom asked. Dyer nodded. "I was ugly business. Did you see her?" "The Apache woman they've got locked up." Dyer hesitated. "No, but I heard Price talking. Real confident. Too confident." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dyer said, lowering his voice, "he never actually saw her help anyone. Just assumed. Said, and I quote, she looked like she knew something." That was enough for him. Tom's jaw tightened. "You'd testify to that?" Dyer stared into his cup. "In that town, with the mood they're in, that's suicide." Tom stood. "Maybe, but staying quiet's worse." He returned to Silverton at dawn. At midday, with the gallows looming behind him, Tom climbed the steps of the courthouse porch. A crowd had gathered for the weekly town bulletin. He waited until the sheriff finished reading announcements. Then, without warning, he stepped forward. "I have something to say," Tom announced. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cobb narrowed his eyes from below. Tom raised his voice. "The Apache woman you sentenced is innocent." Shouts rang out. Someone yelled, "You talk in her side now, Barrett." Tom didn't flinch. "I rode to her village. There's no evidence of any outlaw. And I spoke with a soldier one of yours who said the man accusing her never saw her do a thing. They're all the same." Someone cried. "No, they're not," Tom shot back. "My wife was Apache. She was kind, she was brave, and she was murdered by men who thought just like you that all Apache are guilty." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Cobb stepped forward, his hand near his pistol. "You done, Tom?" "No," Tom said. "I'm just getting started." And with that, he walked off the porch, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Later that night, someone threw a stone through the window of his ranch house. The message was clear. Stand down. But Tom had made his choice. The jailhouse. The stone shattered the window at first light. Tom stood barefoot in his kitchen, staring at the jagged hole as morning wind curled through the curtains. Outside, the ground was still damp from last night's storm. Near the porch, lay the stone, wrapped in a torn scrap of canvas. One word was scrawled in crude charcoal: traitor. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he packed his saddlebag, fed his horse, and rode back to Silverton with a purpose more defined than ever. If they were going to call him a traitor for trying to stop a hanging, then so be it. Let them, he'd wear it better than silence. The jailhouse was quiet when he arrived. Marshal Cobb wasn't in his usual chair. A young Deputy Reed, barely older than 20, manned the front desk. He shifted nervously when Tom entered. "She's still back there," Reed said. "You know, you keep this up, someone's gonna do more than break your window." Tom didn't respond. He walked past him and through the corridor to the cells. Nick was awake, sitting cross-legged in the corner, her back against the wall. When she saw him, she nodded, not a greeting, but recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that, somehow, they were now tied together by this fire. "I heard what you did," she said. "They threw a rock through my window." Tom replied dryly. She raised an eyebrow. "You expected flowers." That caught him off guard. A small smirk tugged at his mouth. "I've been called worse," he said. Her eyes grew serious again. "But it won't help. You can't change their minds." Tom crouched beside the bars. "Maybe not, but I can buy you time." "For what?" He hesitated. "To find your brother. If he saw what happened that day, he might be able to prove your innocence." She lowered her eyes. "If he's still alive." "He is," Tom said. "He made it to the mountain. I know a man who can find him. An old Apache tracker I knew, from the war. Name's Kai." She looked at him sharply. Kai, you know him. He used to bring stories to the village. Songs. He taught my brother how to listen to wind before he taught him to run. Tom nodded. He might still be out near the Red Bluff. I'll ride there tomorrow. She was quiet for a while. Then, why are you doing this, Tom Barrett? He looked at her, really looked, saw the bruises on her wrists, the dust on her skin, the defiant way she held her head even when the world had branded her a murderer. My wife, he said. Alina, she was like you, Apache, strong, proud. I couldn't save her. She died in the cold, with no one to help. She was lucky, Nayland murmured. She had you. Tom's voice tightened. I don't want your luck to end at a noose. She looked at him then, eyes unreadable. Even if you find my brother, they won't believe him. Maybe not, Tom admitted. But if I can show them there's doubt, if I can turn one voice in that jury, or one officer in that fort, we might stop the execution. Do you believe justice is real? She asked softly. I believe it's a choice, he said. And it's time someone chose it. For the next hour, they talked less like prisoner and visitor, more like two people thrown into the same storm. Nayland spoke of her childhood, of hiding from cavalry patrols in dry riverbeds, of her mother's singing and her brother's laughter. Tom told her about the war, about Alina, about a time when he thought land and fences could fix everything. When the deputy finally came to end the visit, Nayland stood. Be careful, Tom Barrett, she said. He tipped his hat. You too. Outside, the wind was rising again. By nightfall, the town buzzed with rumors. Some said the rancher had gone mad, others that he was plotting to break the girl out. But what no one knew, what even Tom couldn't be sure of, was whether the stand he had taken would be enough. That night, Nayland sat in her cell and sang softly, under her breath, a song her mother once taught her, in the old language. A song of the stars, and the hawk, and the mountain. The guard didn't understand the words, but the sound made him uneasy all the same. The escape plan, the trail to Red Bluff, was narrow and mean, winding through jagged rock and dry riverbeds. Tom rode alone beneath a burning sky, dust rising behind him in a lonely ribbon. He knew the route by instinct more than memory. He hadn't ridden this way since the war ended, and he swore he never would again. But that oath had been broken. The day he saw the gallows go up, Red Bluff wasn't a town. It was a stretch of high desert where the wind howled like ghosts through the canyons. Apache once called it sacred, the place where sky met bone. It was where old Kai was said to live, if he hadn't gone fully to spirit. Tom found him at dusk, seated by a small fire under a bent mesquite tree. The old man looked up as if he'd been expecting him. You come with dust on your boots, and a shadow in your eyes, Kai said. Tom dismounted. I came for your help. Kai nodded slowly. The girl, you know. Word travels faster than horses. Tom crouched beside the fire. She's innocent. They'll hang her in 2 days unless I can prove it. Kai poked the fire with a stick. You want to find the boy? Yes, Taza. He may have seen what happened at the village. Kai sighed. Many tracks, but I know the signs of that child's feet. Light, fast, he ran toward the spirit cliffs. I can find him. How long? 1 day, maybe 2. But time is a hungry coyote. Tom stared into the flames. Then I'll buy what time I can. He left Red Bluff at dawn, Kai disappearing into the hills like a whisper. Back in Silverton, the noose was already hanging, swaying gently from the gallows beam. The townsfolk walked past it like it was part of the scenery now. Tom didn't go home. He rode straight to the edge of town, to a weathered barn owned by an old friend, Clara Mason, a widow who ran a feed business and sometimes helped with deliveries. She'd buried her brother after the Dry Creek ambush. She had reason to hate the Apache, but she also had a deep sense of right and wrong. She met him at the door, hands on her hips. You're dragging me into something, aren't you? I need your help, he said. Clara looked him up and down. Is it the girl? Tom nodded. I'm not asking you to lie. Just, if it comes to it, I need a place to hide her for a day, maybe 2. Clara didn't respond right away. Then, she glanced over her shoulder at the barn. You still trust me? With my life, she sighed. Then God help me, I'm in. Next, Tom rode to an old cabin 10 miles north, half buried in scrub and stone. It hadn't been used in years, but the structure was still sound. He stocked it with food, water, and a blanket. If the escape worked, this would be their first stop before heading farther out. Then came the hardest part, finding someone who could help him get Nayland out of jail. He found his answer in the most unexpected place, Deputy Reed. He caught the young man outside the saloon, lighting a cigarette with shaky fingers. "You're not like the others," Tom said. Reed flinched. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job's about to kill an innocent woman." Reed looked down. "You don't know that." "I do. And I think part of you does too." They stood in silence. Then Reed exhaled shaky. "If I help you," he said, "and we get caught." "You won't," Tom said. "But if we don't try, she dies." Reed hesitated. Then he nodded once. The plan was simple, dangerous, and likely to fail. Reed would unlock the outer door to the jail just after midnight. Tom would enter through the rear alley. Clara would wait with her wagon behind the livery stable. If they made it out, they'd ride hard for the foothills, then hide until Kai returned with tows if he found him. Everything had to go right. That night, the desert wind blew hot and dry through the town slept under the illusion of order, while in the dark corners, a desperate plan began to take shape. In her cell, Nayland waited with eyes open, counting the stars through the window's iron bars. Outside, Tom checked his watch. 11:57 p.m. time was a blade, and it was almost sharp enough to cut her loose or cut them all down. The breakout 12:01 a.m., the town of Silverton lay still beneath the weight of its own silence. Shadows pressed against saloon walls and storefronts. The gallows, ghostly in the moonlight, creaked softly in the brazen empty promise of death. Tom Barrett moved like a man already buried, sticking close to the shadows behind the jailhouse. He wore dark canvas, no spurs, and carried only a small pry tool and a holstered pistol. Every step echoed in his ears like thunder. A faint sound, a lock turning. The back door of the jail clicked open. Reed's pale face appeared in the gap. "Hurry," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Tom slipped inside. The air was thick with oil and sweat. Far off, a guard snored behind a closed office door. Reed held a ring of keys and nodded toward the cells. "She's waiting," he said, then pressed the ring into Tom's hand. "I didn't see anything." And just like that, he was gone. Tom moved quickly down the corridor. Nayland stood at the bars, already awake, eyes sharp in the dark. "Didn't think you'd come," she said. "Wasn't sure either," Tom muttered. He slid the key into the lock. It stuck, then clicked. The door groaned open. Nayland stepped out, glancing once over her shoulder at the place that had held her like a cage and, then forward, toward whatever freedom might exist beyond it. They moved fast. At the rear alley, Clara waited in her delivery wagon. She wore a bonnet pulled low and held the reins like any other rancher's widow making a moonlit hay run, but beneath the seat was a rifle and a loaded derringer in her boot. "You're late," she hissed as Tom and Nayland climbed into the back. "Let's go." The wheels creaked as they pulled away from the jail, slow at first, then gathering speed. They made it 2 blocks before the dogs started barking. Tom lifted the wagon's tarp just enough to peer out. A figure stumbled into the street, drunk, maybe, or half asleep, but stopped and stared at the wagon. A shout followed, then another. The alarm was raised. Clara snapped the reins. "Hold on." The horses surged forward, hooves pounding against the dirt road. Behind them, lights flickered on. Doors slammed. A gunshot cracked the air, too high and too far to matter, but enough to turn tension into panic. Tom grabbed Nayland's arm. "We bail at the riverbed." Clara nodded. "I'll keep going, draw them off." At the edge of town, near a split in the road, the wagon slowed just enough. Tom and Nayland jumped. They hit the ground hard and rolled into a gully choked with sagebrush and dry weeds. The moon lit their path as they crawled, then sprinted toward the foothills. Behind them, the wagon tore off down the northern pass, rifle fire chasing it into the dark. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Nayland gasped, keeping pace beside him. "She's tougher than she looks," Tom said. She knew the risk. By dawn, they reached the abandoned cabin Tom had stalked days before. They collapsed inside, lungs burning, legs trembling. Tom locked the door behind them and fell to the floor beside her. They were alive, but it wasn't over. By midday, the posse was riding. Marshal Cobb led the charge, angry and embarrassed, flanked by a half-dozen townsmen and a tracker hired from Fort Maddock. Word spread that the girl had escaped. Some called it betrayal. Others called it treason, but a few, especially those who had seen Tom's speech, started asking questions. In the hills. Tom watched the trail below from the cabin window, rifle across his lap. Nayland sat nearby, sipping from a tin cup. "Think they'll find us?" she asked. Tom shrugged. "If they do, we'll be ready." She smiled faintly. You're not what I expected from a white man. And you're not what they expected from an Apache. They sat in silence, breathing, waiting. That evening, just as the sun sank behind the cliffs, a figure appeared at the edge of the tree line. It was Kai, and beside him, small and skinny but alive, stood a Boitaza. Nayland ran to the door, tears, finally, breaking the surface. Taza cried her name and launched himself into her arms. Tom stepped outside, stunned. You found him. Kai nodded. He saw everything. The day of the raid, he knows who gave the order. And it wasn't her. Tom looked out over the hills, toward the town that now hunted them. It's time to go back, he said. The reckoning, the dawn was gray and cold when Tom Barrett, Nayland, Taza, and Kai crept down from the hills toward Silverton. The town looked smaller from this distance, its dusty streets lined with wooden buildings that seemed to huddle against the morning chill. But beneath that quiet lay a storm. Tom's hand hovered near his holster as they moved. The gallows, empty but ominous, still stood at the town square's center. The rope hung slack, a silent threat. Nayland held Taza close, her eyes sharp and steady despite the fear clenching her heart. She had spent days waiting in a jail cell for death, only to escape and now return with proof of her innocence. It felt unreal. Kai, stoic and wise, scanned the horizon. Justice here is not the same as in the mountains, he said quietly. Tom nodded. We're not here to ask nicely. Their plan was simple but dangerous. At noon, when the town would gather for the weekly court session, Tom would present Taza as a witness and reveal the truth. It was a gamble some would believe, some wouldn't. But they had to try. As they entered town, whispers rippled through the streets like wildfire. Word had spread of the breakout, the boys' return, and Tom's defiance. Faces that once sneered, now turned uncertain. Some hid behind shutters. Others stared openly, at the courthouse steps. Sheriff Cobb blocked their way. You don't belong here, he growled. Tom stood tall. I have proof she's innocent. You'll listen. Cobb's hand moved toward his pistol, but a sudden voice stopped him. Taza, Allen said softly. The boy stepped forward, eyes bright with the memory of what he had seen. He told the crowd about the raid, how soldiers under Lieutenant Price had attacked the village, burning homes and killing innocents. He described seeing Price himself, giving orders to target any who resisted, including Nayland. The crowd murmured in shock. Tom added, Lieutenant Price lied to cover his crimes. He wanted to hang Nayland for his own failure. Suddenly, a man pushed through the crowd. It was Price, flushed and furious. You're all fools, he shouted. She's a traitor and a murderer. Before anyone could react, Kai stepped forward, calm and commanding. You dishonor the memory of the dead with your lies, Price. The townspeople hesitated, eyes flickering between Price and the old tracker. One by one, faces turned away from the lieutenant. Sheriff Cobb swallowed hard and nodded. Price, you're under arrest for perjury and murder. Price's fury broke into a sneer. This isn't over. As he was led away in chains, Nayland's knees weakened, and Tom caught her. You did it, he whispered. We did it, she corrected, tears streaming down her face. The crowd began to disperse, some clapping quietly, others still unsure. But one thing was clear. The tide had turned. Tom looked at Nayland and Taza. You're free. For the first time in weeks, hope warmed the cold air. That evening, under the open sky, Tom and Nayland stood side by side, watching the stars rise. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had fought together and survived. Thank you, Nayland, said. Tom smiled. No, thank you for teaching me what courage really means. And in that moment, justice wasn't just a word. It was a choice, one worth fighting for.